right. Looking... Oh, God. Looking good. Okay. Hey. Do we have people here? Can anyone hear me? Hope people can. Okay. All right. All right. Sounds like it's working. All right. Hello. Welcome. Hope you're doing good. It's been a crazy couple weeks. Um, so I'm gonna be reading from Umberto Eco's seminal essay on um, the beginnings of fascism in Italy as he experienced it. Umberto Eco, if you're not familiar, is a important postmodern philosopher. He wrote a book called Foucault's Pendulum, which is a fantastic book. It's a very heady book, and it's a very intense read. If you're the type of person that really gets into like understanding references and stuff, well, you should probably have like an encyclopedia with you while you read Foucault's Pendulum. Um, uh, so, but he did a lot of research on like the ideas of like hyper reality, similar stuff to what Jean Baudrillard is known for, and I just think, considering how, like, the current climate and everything, I think it's really important for people to understand what fascism means because I see a lot of conflation of certain actions and things uh, that aren't fascism. Conflations of things like acts of violence or authoritarianism or totalitarianism. Um, Fascism is its own beast. It's a very specific set of things that have to kind of occur for it to be fascism. So it's not as easy as there being, uh, people sometimes describe fascism as more of a style than an ideology because it really makes that's really what it is more than anything. But there are certain features of it that are definable. I'll go through kind of, the differences between what makes like a government authoritarian, which, fascism is authoritarian, but it's not authoritarianism. It's not like they're not exactly the same thing. And it may seem like that's splitting hairs, but really it is an important distinction to make. So I'm gonna start reading from this essay, Ur-Fascism, which basically means like proto-fascism or pre-fascism, baby fascism, I guess. Um, but it's not as I was gonna say it's not as fun as that sounds, but I don't think that sounds fun. um, Let me just make sure that everything's going okay with the stream because I'm still quite nascent at this. So okay, cool. Looks like it's mostly working. Um, and let me get here. Um, Let me make sure that my chat is working. Okay, cool. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start reading now. And it's from the New York Review of Books from 1995. Umberto echoes Ur-Fascism. Let's begin. You can find this online. I'll post a pinned comment of where you can find this article. In 1942, at the age of 10, I received the first provincial award of Ludi Juveniles, a voluntary, compulsory competition for young Italian fascists. That is, for every young Italian. I elaborated with rhetorical skill on the subject, should we die for the glory of Mussolini and the immortal destiny of Italy? My answer was positive. I was a smart boy. He knew how to hide among them. I spent 2 of my early years among the SS, the fascists, Republicans, and partisans shooting at one another, and I learned how to dodge bullets. It was good exercise. In April 1945, the partisans took over Milan. 2 days later, they arrived in the small town where I was living at the time. It was a moment of joy. The main square was crowded with people singing and waving flags, calling in loud voices for Mimo, the partisan leader of that area. A former maresciallo, a former maresciallo of the Carabinieri, I don't know what faction that was, but Mimo joined the supporters of General Badoglio, Mussolini's successor, and lost a leg during one of the first clashes with Mussolini's remaining forces. Mimo showed up on the balcony of the city hall, pale, leaning on his crutch, and with one hand tried to calm the crowd. I was waiting for his speech because my whole childhood had been marked by the great historic speeches of Mussolini, whose most significant passages we memorized in school. Silence. Mimo spoke in a hoarse voice, barely audible. He said, "Citizens, friends, after so many painful sacrifices, here we are. Glory to those who have fallen for freedom." And that was it. He went back inside, the crowd yelled, the partisans raised their guns and fired festive volleys. We kids hurried to pick up the shells, precious items, but I had also learned that freedom of speech means freedom from rhetoric. A few days later, I saw the first American soldiers. They were African Americans. The first Yankee I met was a black man, Joseph, who introduced me to the marvels of Dick Tracy and Lil Abner. His comic books were brightly colored and smelled good. One of the officers, Major or Captain Muddy, was a guest in the villa of a family whose 2 daughters were my schoolmates. I met him in the garden where some ladies surrounding Captain Muddy talked in tentative French. Captain Muddy knew some French too. My first image of American liberators was thus, after so many pale faces in black shirts, that of a cultivated black man in a yellow-green uniform saying, "Oui, merci beaucoup, madame. Moi aussi j'aime la champagne." Unfortunately, there was no champagne, but Captain Money gave me my first piece of Wrigley's spearmint, and I started chewing on it all day long. At night, I put my wad in a water glass so it would be fresh the next day. In May, we heard that the war was over. Peace gave me a curious sensation. I had been told that permanent warfare was the normal condition for a young Italian. In the following months, I discovered that the resistance was not only a local phenomenon, but a European one. I learned new exciting words like Rousseau, Maquis, Armée Secrète, Grote Capelle, Warsaw Ghetto. Sorry about my French. Sorry for any of my bad pronunciations of foreign languages, be they Italian, French, or possibly German. That's coming up. Oh boy. I saw the first photographs of the Holocaust, thus understanding the meaning before knowing the word. I realized what we were liberated from. In my country today, there are people who are wondering if the resistance had a real military impact on the course of the war. For my generation, this question is irrelevant. We immediately understood the moral and psychological meaning of the resistance. For us, it was a point of pride to know that we Europeans did not wait passively for liberation. And for the young Americans who were paying with their blood for our restored freedom, it meant something to know that behind the firing lines, there were Europeans paying their own debt in advance. In my country today, there are those who are saying that the myth of the resistance was a communist lie. It is true that the communists exploited the resistance as if it were their personal property, since they played a prime role in it. But I remember partisans with kerchiefs of different colors. Sticking close to the radio, I spent my nights, the windows closed, the blackout making the small space around the set a lone, luminous halo, listening to the messages sent by the voice of London to the partisans. They were cryptic and poetic at the same time. The sun also rises, the roses will bloom. And most of them were messaggi per la Franchi. Somebody whispered to me that Franchi was the leader of the most powerful clandestine network in northwestern Italy, a man of legendary courage. Franchi became my hero. Franchi, whose real name was Edgardo Sogno, was a monarchist so strongly anti-communist that after the war he joined very right-wing groups and was charged with collaborating in a project for a reactionary coup d'etat. Who cares? Sogno still remains the dream hero of my childhood. Liberation was a common deed for people of different colors. In my country today, there are some who say that the War of Liberation was a tragic period of division, that all we need is national reconciliation. The memory of those terrible years should be repressed, refoulé, verdrängt. But verdrängung causes neurosis. If reconciliation means compassion and respect for all those who fought their own war in good faith, to forgive does not mean to forget. I can even admit that Eichmann sincerely believed in his mission. That's Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi doctor. I can even admit that Eichmann sincerely believed in his mission, but I cannot say, okay, come back and do it again. We are here to remember what happened and say solemnly that they must not do it again. But who are they? If we still think of the totalitarian governments that ruled Europe before the Second World War, we can easily say that it would be difficult for them to reappear in the same form in different historical circumstances. I'm just going to repeat that one for posterity. If we still think of the totalitarian governments that ruled Europe before the Second World War, we can easily say that it would be difficult for them to reappear in the same form in different historical circumstances. If Mussolini's fascism was based upon the idea of a charismatic ruler, on corporatism, on the utopia of the imperial fate of Rome, on an imperialistic will to conquer new territories, on an exacerbated nationalism, on the ideal of an entire nation regimented in black shirts, on the rejection of parliamentary democracy, on anti-Semitism, then I have no difficulty in acknowledging that today, the Italian Alleanza Nazionale, born from the post-war fascist party, MSI, and certainly a right-wing party, has by now very little to do with the old fascism. In the same vein, even though I am much concerned about the various Nazi-like movements that have arisen here and there in Europe, including Russia, I do not think that Nazism in its original form is about to reappear as a nationwide movement. Again, this was written in 1995, so I don't think he could have anticipated today. Nevertheless, even though political regimes can be overthrown and ideologies can be criticized and disowned, behind a regime and its ideology there is always a way of thinking and feeling, a group of cultural habits, of obscure instincts and unfathomable drives. Is there still another ghost stalking Europe, not to speak of other parts of the world? Ionesco, is it the Italian writer? I mean, the Romanian writer? I think he may be referring to the either the Romanian writer, or there was also a leader named Ionesco, so I'm not sure which. Ionesco once said that only words count and the rest is mere chattering. Linguistic habits are frequently important symptoms of underlying feelings. Thus, it is worth asking why not only the resistance but the Second World War was generally defined throughout the world as a struggle against fascism. If you reread Hemingway's For Whom the Bells Toll, you will discover that Robert Jordan identifies his enemies with fascists, even when he thinks of the Spanish Phalangists. And for FDR, the victory of the American people and their allies will be a victory against fascism and the dead hand of despotism it represents. During World War II, the Americans took part in the Spanish War. I'm sorry, I misread that. During World War II, the Americans who took part in the Spanish War were called premature anti-fascists, meaning that fighting against Hitler in the 40s was a moral duty for every good American. But fighting against Franco too early in the 30s smelled sour, because it was mainly done by communists and other leftists. Why was an expression like fascist pig used by American radicals 30 years later to refer to a cop who did not approve of their smoking habits? Why didn't they say Cagular pig, Phalangist pig, Ustache pig, Quisling pig, Nazi pig? Mein Kampf is a manifesto of a complete political program. Nazism had a theory of racism and of the Aryan chosen people, a precise notion of degenerate art, entartete Kunst, a philosophy of the will to power and of the Übermensch. Nazism was decidedly anti-Christian and neo-pagan, while Stalin's Diamat, the official version of Soviet Marxism, was blatantly materialistic and atheistic. If by totalitarianism one means a regime that subordinates every act of the individual to the state and to its ideology, then both Nazism and Stalinism were true totalitarian regimes. This is where he's making the distinction between totalitarianism and fascism in specific. Totalitarianism as a whole and fascism in specific. So, Italian fascism was certainly a dictatorship, but it was not totally totalitarian, not because of its mildness, but rather because of the philosophical weakness of its ideology. Contrary to common opinion, fascism in Italy had no special philosophy. The article on fascism signed by Mussolini in the Treccani Encyclopedia was written or basically inspired by Giovanni Gentile, but it reflected a late Hegelian notion of the absolute and ethical state, which was never fully realized by Mussolini. Mussolini did not have any philosophy. He had only rhetoric. He was a militant atheist at the beginning and later signed the convention with the church and welcomed the bishops who blessed the fascist penance. In his early anti-clerical days, according to a likely legend, he once asked God, in order to prove his existence, to strike him down on the spot. Later, Mussolini always cited the name of God in his speeches and did not mind being called the man of providence. flexibility. It's an important element. Italian fascism was the first right-wing dictatorship that took over a European country, and all similar movements later found a sort of archetype in Mussolini's regime. Italian fascism was the first to establish a military liturgy, a folklore, even a way of dressing, far more influential with its black shirts than Armani, Benetton, or Versace would ever be. It was only in the 30s that fascist movements appeared, with mostly in Great Britain and in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Yugoslavia, Spain, Portugal, Norway, and even in South America. It was Italian fascism that convinced many European liberal leaders that the new regime was carrying out interesting social reform and that it was providing a mildly revolutionary alternative to the communist threat. Just going to pause and point out that that's an important thing to note, because very often the fear of communism is used as the pretext for working with fascists. So always be wary of that element. That's an important thing that people often forget, that that liberalism will often fall to fascism. Just keep that in mind. Nevertheless, historical priority does not seem to me a sufficient reason to explain why the word fascism became a synecdoche, that is, a word that could be used for different totalitarian movements. This is not because fascism contained in itself, so to speak, in their quintessential state, all the elements of any later form of totalitarianism. On the contrary, fascism has no quintessence. Fascism was a fuzzy totalitarianism, a collage of different political and philosophical ideas, a beehive of contradictions. Can one conceive of a truly totalitarian movement that was able to combine monarchy with revolution, the royal army with Mussolini's personal milizia? Did I say that right? Milizia? Like militia in Italian. The grant of privileges to the church with state education extolling violence, absolute state control with a free market? The fascist party was born boasting that it brought... Sorry, let me start that again. The fascist party was born boasting that it brought a revolutionary new order, but it was financed by the most conservative among the landowners, who expected from it a counter-revolution. At its beginning, fascism was Republican. That's small r Republican, just so we're clear. Republican being governance by elected representatives, so to speak. Yet it survived for 20 years, proclaiming its loyalty to the royal family, while the Duce, the unchallenged maximal leader, Mussolini, was arm in arm with the king, to whom he was offered... Oh. Did I... Oh, is there problems with my camera? Uh-oh. Hold on. Just a sec. Oh, great. Okay, hold on just a sec. Ah! Boy, the program I apologize for the crazy visuals, everybody. This happens sometimes with this camera app, apparently. Oh boy. Come on, you son of a bitch. Let's hope it works now. Start live view. Did my camera die? Is that what happened? Oh boy, oh boy. This is great. I love it. You gotta be kidding me. Okay, hold on just a sec. I have another solution. Okay. I'm... Rave party. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's great. I'm gonna try using a different cam Here we go. Epoch. Oh, jeez. Come on. All right. Ah, what a pain. Sorry, y'all. Okay, here we go. Oh, man. I need someone to just run my streams. Anybody want to run streams for me? That'd be great. Okay. New camera. Alright. There we go. Sorry if it's a little more pixelated. Where were we? Here we go. I'll start from earlier, where I started talking about the fascist party. Okay. Let me just make sure it's working for everybody across the board. Okay, cool. The fascist party was born boasting that it brought a revolutionary new order, but it was financed by the most conservative among the landowners, who expected from it a counter-revolution. At its beginning, fascism was republican, yet it survived for 20 years, proclaiming its loyalty to the royal family. Let me readjust the camera a bit. There we go. And there we go. That's a little better. At its beginning, fascism was republican, yet it survived for 20 years, proclaiming its loyalty to the royal family. While the Duce, the unchallenged maximal leader, that is Mussolini, was arm in arm with the king, to whom he offered the title of emperor. But when the king fired Mussolini in 1943, the party reappeared 2 months later, with German support, under the standard of a social republic, recycling its old revolutionary script, now enriched with almost Jacobin overtones. There was only a single Nazi architecture and a single Nazi art. If the Nazi architect was Albert Speer, there was no room for Mies van der Rohe. Similarly, under Stalin's rule, if Lamarck was right, there was no room for Darwin. In Italy, there were certainly fascist architects, but close to their pseudo-colosseums were many new buildings inspired by the modern rationalism of Gropius. There was no fascist Zhdanov setting a strict cultural line, a strictly cultural line. That's reference to the communist. I believe it was cultural. He was like the cultural leader. He focused on like making sure a lot of art was like social realist and all that. In Italy, there were two important art awards. The Premio Cremona was controlled by a fanatical and uncultivated fascist, Roberto Farinacci, who encouraged art as propaganda. I can remember paintings with such titles as "Listening by the Radio to the Duce's Speech" or "States of Mind Created by Fascism." The Premio Bergamo was sponsored by the cultivated and reasonably tolerant fascist Giuseppe Bottai, who protected both the concept of art for art's sake and the many kinds of avant-garde art that had been banned as corrupt and crypto-communist in Germany. The national poet was D'Annunzio, a dandy who in Germany and in Russia, who in Germany or in Russia would have been sent to the firing squad. He was appointed as the bard of the regime because of his nationalism and his cult of heroism, which were in fact abundantly mixed up with influences of French fin de siècle, decadence. Take futurism. One might think it would have been considered an instance of Entagte Kunst, along with Expressionism, Cubism, and Surrealism. But the early Italian futurists were nationalist. They favored Italian participation in the First World War for aesthetic reasons. They celebrated cultural violence and risk, all of which somehow seemed to connect with the fascist cult of youth. While fascism identified itself with the Roman Empire and rediscovered rural traditions, Marinetti, who proclaimed that a car was more beautiful than the victory of Samothrace and wanted to kill even the moonlight, was nevertheless appointed as a member of the Italian Academy, which treated moonlight with great respect. So Marinetti was one of the eminent futurists. The futurists were a Italian artistic movement that really focused on mechanics. They tried to find the beauty in the industrial. So there was a lot of sound art that came out of futurists. Futurists influenced later avant-garde musical movements. They built their own instruments, and they all were insanely mechanical and had these otherworldly sort of sounds, really industrial sounds, mechanical sounds. And their work is really cool, but they were firmly fascist. And most of them conscripted and died in World War II. Many of the future partisans and of the future intellectuals of the Communist Party were educated by the GUF, the Fascist University Students' Association, which was supposed to be the cradle of the new fascist culture. These clubs became a sort of intellectual melting pot where new ideas circulated without any real ideological control. It was not that the men of the party were tolerant of radical thinking, but few of them had the intellectual equipment to control it. During those 20 years, the poetry of Montale and other writers was associated with the group called the Ermetici. Ermetici, yeah. Was a reaction to the bombastic style of the regime, and these poets were allowed to develop their literacy protest from within what was seen as their ivory tower. The mood of the Ermetici poets was exactly the reverse of the fascist cult of optimism and heroism. The regime tolerated their blatant, even though socially imperceptible, dissent because the fascists simply did not pay attention to such arcane language. All this does not mean that Italian fascism was tolerant. Gramsci was put in prison until his death. The opposition leaders, Giacomo Matteotti and the brothers Rosselli, were assassinated. I believe the Rosselli brothers were anarchists, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, though. The free press was abolished, the labor unions were dismantled, and political dissenters were confined on remote islands. Legislative power became a mere fiction, and the executive power, which controlled the judiciary as well as the mass media, directly issued new laws, among them laws calling for the preservation of the race, the formal Italian gesture of support for what became the Holocaust. The contradictory picture I described was not the result of tolerance, but of political and ideological discombobulation. But it was a rigid discombobulation, a structured confusion. Fascism was philosophically out of joint, but emotionally it was firmly fastened to some archetypal foundations. So we come to my second point. There was only one Nazism. We cannot label Franco's hyper-Catholic Phalangism as Nazism, since Nazism is fundamentally pagan, polytheistic, and anti-Christian. I take issue with him calling it anti-Christian, but he's more of an expert than I, so maybe I should defer to that. But the fascist game can be played in many forms, and the name of the game does not change. The notion of fascism is not unlike Wittgenstein's notion of a game. A game can either be competitive or not. It can require some special skill or none. It can or cannot involve money. Games are different activities that display only some family resemblance, as Wittgenstein put it. Consider the following sequence: 1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D, E, F. And I'll put it up to the camera so you guys can see what I'm talking about as well. Oh, it's reversed. Well, put a mirror up to your computer screens. I wonder, can I reverse my... Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D, E, F. Suppose there is a series of political groups in which one... Oh, and just a response to some of the chat carols. Yes, I do have a PDF, and I will link it on Facebook. I'll link it on Facebook and Twitter. I'll be sure to do that for you guys. Suppose there is a series of political groups in which Group 1 is characterized by the features A, B, C. Group 2 features B, C, D, and so on. So 4 groups: A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, and D, E, F. You don't have to remember all that, but yeah. Group 2 is similar to Group 1 since they have 2 features in common. For the same reasons, 3 is similar to 2, and 4 is similar to 3. Notice that 3 is also similar to 1. They have in common the feature C. The most curious case is presented by 4, obviously similar to 2 and 3, but with no feature in common with 1. However, owing to the uninterrupted series of decreasing similarities between 1 and 4, there remains illusory transitivity, a family resemblance between 4 and 1. Fascism became an all-purpose term because one can eliminate from a fascist regime one or more features, and it will still be fascist. Take away imperialism from fascism, and you still have Franco and Salazar. Take away colonialism, and you still have the Balkan fascism of the Ustaches. Add to the Italian fascism a radical anti-capitalism, which never much fascinated Mussolini, and you have Ezra Pound. Add a cult of Celtic mythology and the Grail mysticism, completely alien to official fascism, and you have one of the most respected fascist gurus, Julius Evola. Julius Evola, incidentally, is considered by Milo Yiannopoulos the founding philosopher of the alt-right. So his ideas do need to be explored to some extent. So yeah. I'm not gonna go over his philosophy in this, but just bear that in mind, that his philosophy is important to that development. But in spite of this fuzziness, I think it is possible to outline a list of features that are typical of what I would call Ur-Fascism, or eternal fascism. These features cannot be organized into a system, many of them contradict each other, and are also typical of other kinds of despotism and fanaticism. But it is enough that one of them be present. But it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it. And so this next part, before 5-3D, don't you think it's a bit late for this? Well, better late than never, I guess, right? So this is where he starts going into the list of these different features. The first feature of Ur-Fascism is the cult of tradition. So we have the first one, cult of tradition. Traditionalism is, of course, much older than fascism. Not only was it typical of counter revolutionary Catholic thought after the French Revolution, but it was born in the late Hellenistic era as a reaction to classical Greek rationalism. In the Mediterranean basin, people of different religions, most of them indulgently accepted by the Roman pantheon, started dreaming of a revelation received by the dawn of human history. This revelation, according to the traditionalist mystique, had remained for a long time concealed under the veil of forgotten languages in Egyptian hieroglyphs, in the Celtic runes, in the scrolls of the little-known religions of Asia. This new culture had to be syncretistic. Syncretism is not only, as the dictionary says, the combination of different forms of beliefs or practice. Such a combination must tolerate contradictions. Each of the original messages contain a sliver. Did it mean to say sliver of wisdom? A silver of wisdom. I'm not sure if I don't know if he means sliver or silver. I'm not exactly sure what he means in that context, but each of the original messages contains a silver of wisdom, and whenever they seem to say different or incompatible things, it is only because all are alluding allegorically to the same primeval truth. As a consequence, there can be no advancement of learning. Truth has been already spelled out once and for all, and we can only keep interpreting its obscure message. One has only to look at the syllabus of every fascist movement to find the major traditionalist thinkers. The Nazi gnosis was nourished by traditionalist, syncretistic, occult elements. The most influential theoretical source of the theories of the new Italian right, Julius Evola, merged the Holy Grail with the protocols of the Elders of Zion, alchemy with the Holy Roman Empire and Germanic Empire. Now, the protocols, just to give context, the protocols of the Elders of Zion is an old early 1900s, I think like 1906 or maybe even a little bit earlier, fictional Russian propaganda piece. It's claimed to be a accounting of a Zionist plan to take over the world, and it's completely false, but it's eminently popular in nationalist, white supremacist, racist, fascist, Nazi groups and thinkers, and it's it's been widely discredited. It was basically created under the Russian Empire. Um, yeah, yeah, okay. Um, we sliver equals tiny slice. No, and B45 3D on Twitch says sliver tiny slice of. No, I'm aware of that. The word in the writing is silver. So a silver of wisdom. So I'm not sure if it's a that's what I was saying. I'm not sure if it's a spelling error, like they meant to say sliver, but it says silver. So I don't know. But anyway, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a work of propaganda fiction, basically. Um, the very fact that the Italian right, in order to show its open-mindedness, recently broadened its syllabus to include works by Demastre, Guénon, and Gramsci is a blatant proof of syncretism, which is interesting. I didn't. He's saying that the Italian right includes Gramsci, which is very weird because he was a eminent communist. If you browse in the shelves that in American bookstores are labeled as New Age, you can find there even St. Augustine, who, as far as I know, was not a fascist. But combining St. Augustine and Stonehenge, that is a symptom of Ur-Fascism. So the conflation and combination of two or more different contradictory traditional beliefs and systems. Nazis, for example, used a lot of runes. Their use of runes is prevalent to this day. White nationalist movements all over the world used runes. Sorry, I needed some of that. Okay. So number two. So number one, cult of tradition and the combining of multiple different contradictory traditional views and practices and symbols. Two, traditionalism implies the rejection of modernism. Both fascists and Nazis worshipped technology, while traditionalist thinkers usually reject it as a negation of traditional spiritual values. However, even though Nazism was proud of its industrial achievements, its praise of modernism was only the surface of an ideology based on blood and earth, Blut und Boden. The rejection of the modern world was disguised as a rebuttal of the capitalistic way of life, but it mainly concerned the rejection of the spirit of 1789 and of 1776, of course. The Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, is seen as the beginning of modern depravity. In this sense, Ur-Fascism can be defined as irrationalism. Number three, irrationalism also depends on the cult of action for action's sake. Action being beautiful in itself, it must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Thinking is a form of emasculation. Therefore, culture is suspect insofar as it is defined with critical attitudes. Distrust of the intellectual world has always been a symptom of Ur-Fascism. From Goering's alleged statement, "When I hear talk of culture, I reach for my gun," to the frequent use of such expressions as degenerate intellectuals, eggheads, effete snobs, universities are a nest of reds. That sounds familiar. The official fascist intellectuals were mainly engaged in attacking modern culture and the liberal intelligentsia for having betrayed traditional values. 4. No syncretistic faith can withstand analytical criticism. The critical spirit makes distinctions, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. I'll read that again. The critical spirit makes distinctions, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. In modern culture, the scientific community praises disagreement as a way to improve knowledge. For Ur-Fascism, disagreement is treason. Number 5. Besides, disagreement is a sign of diversity. Ur-Fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Thus, Ur-Fascism is racist by definition. Number 6. Ur-Fascism derives from individual or social frustration. That is why one of the most typical features of the historical fascism was the appeal to a frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation, and frightened by the pressure of lower social groups. In our time, when the old proletarians are becoming petit bourgeoisie, and the lumpen proletariat are largely excluded from the political scene, the fascism of tomorrow will find its audience in this new majority. So, as proles become petit bourgeoisie, they become more susceptible to fascism, is his point. To people who feel deprived of a... Oh, this is number 7, by the way. Number 7. To people who feel deprived of a clear social identity, Ur-Fascism says that their only privilege is the most common one, to be born in the same country. This is the origin of nationalism. Besides, The only ones who can provide an identity to the nation are its enemies. Thus, at the root of Ur-Fascist psychology, there is the obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The International Jew was an important work of Nazi propaganda. The followers must feel besieged. Let me rephrase that, say that again. The followers must feel besieged. The easiest way to solve the plot is the appeal to xenophobia. But the plot must also come from the inside. Jews are usually the best target because they have the advantage of being at the same time inside and outside. In the U.S., and this is a reference to then, 1985, but it still works today. In the U.S., a prominent instance of the plot obsession is to be found in Pat Robertson's The New World Order, but as we have recently seen, there are many others. So he acknowledged that element. Number 8. The followers must feel humiliated by the ostentatious wealth and force of their enemies. When I was a boy, I was taught to think of Englishmen as the five-meal people. They ate more frequently than the poor but sober Italians. Jews are rich and help each other through a secret web of mutual assistance. However, the followers must be convinced that they can overwhelm the enemies. Thus, by a continuing shift of rhetorical focus, let me say that again so it's complete. Thus, by a continuing shifting of, Thus, by a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus, the enemies at the same time are too strong and too weak. Fascist governments are condemned to lose wars because they are constitutionally incapable of objectively evaluating the force of the enemy. So that's an important thing. Just pausing here. Followers of have to be convinced that the enemy in one sentence is too strong, but it's also too weak. So the Jews have are rich and they aid each other through a secret web of mutual assistance, the New World Order. But they are also vermin who need to be exterminated. So when they're talking about one thing, the Jews are one thing. When they're talking about another thing, the Jews are that opposite thing. So it's always shifting the strength and weakness of the enemy. Number 9. For Ur-Fascism, there is no struggle for life, but rather life is lived for struggle. Thus, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. It is bad because life is permanent warfare. This, however, brings about an Armageddon complex. Since enemies have to be defeated, there must be a final battle, after which the movement will have control of the world. But such a final solution implies a further era of peace, a golden age, which contradicts the principle of permanent war. No fascist leader has ever succeeded in solving this predicament. So they're always trying to achieve a golden age that never comes because life is permanent warfare. They're always going to create a new enemy. If you are familiar with the Martin Niemöller poem, First They Came, First They Came for the Socialists, and I did not speak up because I was not a socialist, look that up, because that's basically what this is talking about. The fascists always need an enemy. So, you can be considered white insofar as you're helping them achieve their goals of, let's say, removing the Jews or removing all people of color from a nation. Well, once they've done that, they're going to make the circle smaller. Maybe Italians were considered white. Well, after Jews are gone and people of color are gone, they're next, or whoever is next. There's always has to be an enemy because life is permanent warfare for them. Number 10. Elitism is a typical aspect of any reactionary ideology, insofar as it is fundamentally aristocratic, and aristocratic and militaristic elitism cruelly implies contempt for the weak. Ur-Fascism can only advocate a popular elitism. Every citizen belongs to the best people of the world. The members of the party are among the best of the citizens. Every citizen can or ought to become a member of the party. But there cannot be patricians without plebeians. In fact, the leader, knowing that his power was not delegated to him democratically but was conquered by force, also knows that his force is based upon the weakness of the masses. They are so weak as to need and deserve a ruler. Since the group is hierarchically organized, according to a military model, every subordinate leader despises his own underlings, and each of them despises his inferiors. This reinforces the sense of mass elitism. Number 11. In such a perspective, everybody is educated to become a hero. In every mythology, the hero is an exceptional... In every mythology, the hero is an exceptional... mixing up my words. In every mythology, the hero is an exceptional being, but in Ur-Fascist ideology, heroism is the norm. This cult of heroism is strictly linked with the cult of death. It is not by chance that a motto of the Phalangists was Viva la Muerte. In English, it should be translated as Long Live Death. In non-fascist societies, the lay public is told that death is unpleasant and must be faced with dignity. Believers are told that it is a painful way to reach a supernatural happiness. By contrast, the Ur-Fascist hero craves heroic death, advertised as the best reward for a heroic life. The Ur-Fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to die. Since both permanent... Oh, this is number 12, sorry. Number 12. Since both permanent war and heroism are difficult games to play, the Ur-Fascist implies that his will to power to... Oh, I'm sorry. I misread that. Ugh. I'm reading a lot. This is getting too much. Number 12. Since both permanent war and heroism are difficult games to play, the Ur-Fascist transfers his will to power to sexual matters. This is the origin of machismo, which implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. Since even sex is a difficult game to play, the Ur-Fascist hero tends to play with weapons. Doing so becomes an ersatz phallic exercise. Ur-Fascism is based upon a selective populism. This is number 13. 13. Ur-Fascism is based upon a selective populism, a qualitative populism, one might say. In a democracy, the citizens have individual rights, but the citizens in their entirety have a political impact only from a quantitative point of view. One follows the decisions of the majority. For Ur-Fascism, however, individuals as individuals have no rights, and the people is conceived as a quality, a monolithic entity expressing the common will. Since no large quantity of humans can have a common will, the leader pretends to be their interpreter. Having lost their power of delegation, citizens do not act. They are only called upon to play the role of the people. Thus the people is only a theatrical fiction. To have a good instance of qualitative populism, we no longer need the Piazza Venezia in Rome or the Nuremberg Stadium. This is in our future a TV or internet populism, in which the emotional response of a selected group of citizens can be presented and accepted as the voice of the people. Because of its qualitative populism, Ur-Fascism must be against rotten parliamentary governments. One of the first sentences uttered by Mussolini in the Italian parliament was, I could have transformed this deaf and gloomy place into a bivouac for my maniples. Maniples being a subdivision of the traditional Roman legion. As a matter of fact, he immediately found better housing for his maniples, but a little later, he liquidated the parliament. Wherever a politician casts doubt on the legitimacy of a parliament because it no longer represents the voice of the people, we can smell Ur-Fascism. Now, we're gonna I'm gonna point something out though really quick because it's not enough to say that a politician casting doubt on of a parliament not representing the voice of the people, because that rhetoric can be used in left-wing contexts as well. In fact, I believe that the Congress of the United States doesn't represent the will of the people. But this isn't referring to that. The people are a constructed public. They're not a. This isn't in this context. They're not saying that like this is actually what the people want. This is a dictator saying and constructing what the people think without actually providing evidence that majority of people believe this, or polls or anything like that. It has no interest in actually instilling the will of the people. It's the will of the people. It's a bit hard to describe in the abstract, but that's essentially what he's talking about. And number 14, this is the last, I believe this is the last one the numbered. Yeah, this is about close to the end. Ur-Fascism speaks Newspeak. Newspeak was invented by George Orwell in 1984 as the official language of Ingsoc, English socialism. But elements of Ur-Fascism are common to different forms of dictatorship. All the Nazi or fascist schoolbooks made use of an impoverished vocabulary and an elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical reasoning. But we must be ready to identify other kinds of newspeak, even if they take the apparently innocent form of a popular talk show. Now, before I move on, I just want to point out again that sometimes what people will talk about with like left wing discourse is this idea that things like cisgender or transgender are forms of newspeak, and that's just not true, because it's not a newspeak in the context of 1984. If you've actually read the book, you would get this more, and especially if you've read to the back, because George Orwell gives like a dictionary of newspeak. The idea of newspeak isn't to add words to the lexicon. It's to remove words from the lexicon. If you don't have a word for rebellion or revolution, you have a limited way to express what a revolution, a limited way to express and a desire for revolution. If you live in a society where you don't have a word for war, theoretically you may be in a society where war hasn't been a thing yet, or whatever. This is all, I mean, I'm very bare bones saying this. I'm not saying I'm exactly right, but essentially, newspeak is about limiting our vocabulary, not expanding it. And terminology like cisgender and transgender both of those words would be eliminated from any form of like newspeak, because they don't because whoever is pushing for the fascist regime would be very likely trying to eliminate abilities for people to do questioning or anything like that, questioning their gender or sexuality or anything like that. So, words like transgender or homosexual would be replaced with words like degenerate or something like that. You know, like it would be a simplified um, lexicon, not a complicated lexicon. So I think that's an important distinction to make, and that's one of the things that bugs me when people invoke 1984 when talking about left wing discourse, because left wing discourse is almost never about limiting. And I'm talking discourse, not necessarily governments, but discourse is almost never about limiting language. It's always about improving or expanding language, for the most part. I would like to say across the board, but you always have to qualify it because it's never really useful to say this is 100% true, because it's there's always going to be exceptions to things. So I'll read number 14 again so we can keep going. 14, Ur-Fascism speaks Newspeak. Newspeak was invented by Orwell in 1984 as the official language of INGSOC, English socialism, but elements of Ur-Fascism are common to different forms of dictatorship. All the Nazi or fascist schoolbooks made use of an impoverished vocabulary and an elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical thinking. But we must be ready to identify other kinds of newspeak, even if they take the apparently innocent form of a popular talk show. On the morning of July 27th, 1943, I was told, according to radio reports, fascism had collapsed and Mussolini was under arrest. When my mother sent me out to buy the newspaper, I saw that the papers at the nearest newsstand had different titles. Moreover, after seeing the headlines, I realized that each newspaper was said different things. I bought one of them blindly and read a message on the front signed by 5 or 6 political parties, among them the Democrazia Cristiana, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the Partito d'Azione, and the Liberal Party. Until then, I had believed that there was a single party in every country, and that in Italy it was the Partito Nazionale Fascista. Now, I was discovering that in my country, several parties could exist at the same time. Since I was a clever boy, I immediately realized that so many parties could not have been born overnight, and they must have existed for some time as clandestine organizations. The message on the front celebrated the end of the dictatorship and the return of freedom, freedom of speech, of press, of political association. These words, freedom, dictatorship, liberty, now I read them for the first. Come on. Sorry, my camera went out. Oh boy. Camera problems, I swear. Come on. Oh my god, are you serious right now? Maybe I can get my maybe I can get my other camera working again. Oh boy. Really? Uh Sorry people. God damn it. Come on. Hold on just a sec. Let's try reopening the app. Boy, oh boy. This is such a pain. I'm really sorry, guys. You gotta be kidding me right now. Come on. Alright, well, I'm gonna turn on my, my little logo thingy. Just have that be the image for the rest of it. Alright, sorry about that. But we're gonna keep going. We must keep alert so that... Oh, did it work? No. We must keep alert so that the sense of these words will not be forgotten again. Ur-Fascism is still around us, sometimes in plain clothes. It would be so much easier for us if there appeared on the world scene somebody saying, I want to reopen Auschwitz, I want the black shirts to parade again in the Italian squares. Life is not that simple. Ur-Fascism can come back under the most innocent of disguises. Our duty is to uncover it and point our finger at any of its instances. New instances. Every day in every part of the world. Franklin Roosevelt's words of November 4th, 1938 are worth recalling. I venture the challenging statement that if American democracy ceases to move forward as a living force, seeking day and night by peaceful means to better the lot of our citizens, fascism will grow in strength in our land. Freedom and liberation are an unending task. And he finishes here with a poem by Franco Fortini. I practiced this, but if I get it wrong, I am so sorry. But I'm going to read it in the original Italian and then read the translation because the rhymes are really powerful in this. Sulla spalletta del ponte, le teste degli impiccati. Nell'acqua della fonte, la bava degli impiccati. Sul lastrico del mercato, le unghie dei fucilati. Sull'erba secca del prato, i denti dei fucilati. Mordere l'aria, mordere i sassi. La nostra carne non è più d'uomini. Mordere l'aria, mordere i sassi. Il nostro cuore non è più d'uomini. Ma noi se letto negli occhi dei morti e sulla terra faremo libertà. Ma l'hanno stretta i pugni dei morti, la giustizia che si farà. And that means, on the bridge's parapet, the heads of the hanged. In the flowing rivulet, the spittle of the hanged. On the cobbles in the marketplaces, the fingernails of those lined up and shot. On the dry grass in the open spaces, the broken teeth of those lined up and shot. Biting the air, biting the stones, our flesh is no longer human. Biting the air, biting the stones, our hearts are no longer human. But we have read into the eyes of the dead, and shall bring freedom on the earth, but clenched tight in the fists of the dead lies the justice to be served. All right. Thank you all for watching. I'm really sorry about the video problems. I tested them before, and I thought it would all stay fine. I don't know why my cameras are not quite working with my stream. Looked fine for a while, but I'm not really sure what's going on. If anyone is down to help me out with that, it'd be great. I'll explain to you my setup and everything, and hopefully next time it'll be a better stream. Again, I apologize, but hopefully you found this informative, and be safe, okay? And take care of those you love, okay?